Racist barista refuses service to black woman, then learns she's his new CEO. How will this story escalate? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The morning rush at Brew and Bean was in full swing. Customers lined up, the scent of freshly ground coffee beans filling the air. The hum of conversation mixed with the rhythmic sound of the espresso machine, a familiar tune in the heart of downtown. Among the many eager patrons waiting for their morning fix was Ava Thompson, a poised and confident black woman in a sleek gray blazer, her presence commanding without trying. She had arrived early that morning, excited but focused. This was her first visit to the cafe since acquiring the chain, and she wanted to experience it as an ordinary customer before making any executive changes. She had worked tirelessly to climb the corporate ladder, breaking barriers in an industry where she was often underestimated. Now, she had achieved something monumental. She was the new CEO of Brew and Bean, the very company whose coffee she had once enjoyed as a college student. But today, she wasn't there as an executive. She was just another customer. As she approached the counter, she noticed a subtle shift in energy. The barista behind the counter, Heather, a young woman with sharp features and an impatient expression, barely looked up from the register. Ava gave her a polite smile. "Good morning. I'll have a caramel latte, please. Large." Heather finally looked at her, eyes narrowing slightly. She glanced at the line behind Ava, where a group of well-dressed white men stood, chatting amongst themselves. Then, with a sigh, she leaned against the counter. "We're actually out of caramel right now," she said, though she made no effort to check. Ava raised an eyebrow. "That's odd. The menu board says it's available, and I see the syrup bottles behind you." Heather's jaw tensed, but she forced a tight smile. "Well, I'm saying we're out," she snapped, her tone suddenly short. A few heads turned. The men in line behind Ava watched with mild curiosity, but no one spoke up. Ava remained calm. She had encountered this kind of passive-aggressive discrimination before, too many times to count. But that didn't make it any less frustrating. "All right," Ava said coolly, folding her arms. "Then I'll take a vanilla latte." Heather exhaled dramatically, punching in the order. "That'll be $6.75. Ava pulled out her card, but before she could tap it, Heather's expression hardened. "Actually," she said, "we're only taking cash right now." Ava blinked, her patience beginning to wear thin. "I just watched you take a card payment from the gentleman ahead of me." Heather's eyes flickered with something. Annoyance, maybe even fear. She was caught, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. "Look, I don't make the rules," she said, her voice clipped. "If you don't have cash, I can't help you." A hush fell over the cafe. The men in line shifted uncomfortably. A few other customers had noticed the exchange now, their gazes darting between Ava and Heather. Some of them recognized what was happening. Some just wanted their coffee and to be on their way. Ava took a slow breath. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, not just from this moment, but from a lifetime of similar moments. This wasn't about coffee. This was about something much deeper. She met Heather's gaze evenly. "Is that right?" she said, her voice steady. Heather's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's right." Ava stared at her for a long moment before slowly tucking her card back into her wallet. Then, with the same calm composure, she stepped aside. "All right then," she said. "Go ahead and take the next customer." Heather's posture relaxed slightly, relieved to have won whatever power struggle she thought she was engaged in. "Next," she called, her voice bright and cheerful again. One of the men behind Ava stepped forward hesitantly. He was in his mid-30s, dressed in a navy suit, and had been watching the entire interaction with an expression of discomfort. He cleared his throat. I'll have a caramel latte," he said. Heather's demeanor completely changed. She smiled, her voice suddenly sweet and accommodating. "Of course, coming right up." Ava didn't move. She simply observed. Not out of caramel, not cash only, just selective discrimination. It was textbook. As Heather handed the man his change, she glanced at Ava again, a smug satisfaction flickering in her eyes. She had expected Ava to walk out humiliated, but Ava wasn't going anywhere. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek black folder. Without saying a word, she opened it and placed it gently on the counter. Inside was a letterhead bearing the Brew and Bean corporate logo, signed with her own name. Heather frowned. "What's this?" she asked, confused. Ava smiled. "It's a memo," she said, her voice calm but firm. "From the new CEO. Effective immediately." Heather's confusion deepened. She glanced at the letter, scanning the first few lines. And then, suddenly, all the color drained from her face. Ava continued, her tone unwavering. "I'm Ava Thompson. I just acquired this company. And as of this morning, I officially oversee every single Brew and Bean location, including this one." Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. Heather's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She looked around as if searching for someone to save her, but no one spoke. The men in line, the customers at nearby tables, even the other baristas. All of them had frozen, their eyes wide with shock. Heather stammered, scrambling for words. Ava didn't give her the chance. "You refused me service. You lied about your stock. You enforced a cash-only rule that doesn't exist," she listed methodically. "All of which directly violate company policy and, more importantly, basic human decency." Heather's breathing quickened. I didn't. It wasn't." Ava tilted her head. "Wasn't what? Racist? Discriminatory?" She let the words hang in the air. Heather's lip trembled. I was just... I didn't mean..." Ava sighed, shaking her head. "Intent doesn't matter. Impact does." By now, a small crowd had gathered. The employees behind the counter stood frozen, their expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed schadenfreude. A few of them had clearly never liked Heather's attitude to begin with. Ava turned to them. "Who's the shift manager here?" A hesitant voice piped up. "That would be me," said a young man named Eric, stepping forward. He looked nervous, but also like he had been waiting for Heather's reign of power to end. Ava nodded. "Good. We're going to have a discussion about staffing, training, and how this location will be run moving forward." Heather's eyes widened in pure panic. Wait, please, I need this job." Ava exhaled slowly, considering her response. "You needed this job when you had the chance to treat me with respect," she said. "Instead, you chose discrimination. So no, Heather, you don't work here anymore." The words hit like a thunderclap. Heather gasped, her eyes welling up with tears. But Ava didn't budge. "You can see yourself out. Now." Heather hesitated for only a moment longer before realizing she had no choice. With a shaky breath, she yanked off her apron, threw it onto the counter, and stormed past the silent onlookers. As the door swung shut behind her, the tension in the cafe finally broke. Ava turned to Eric. "We'll talk in the back." Then she looked around the cafe, her voice strong and clear. "And just so everyone knows, Brew and Bean is now under new leadership. The kind that doesn't tolerate discrimination." The room erupted into applause. And just like that, Ava Thompson had set the tone for her new role as CEO. No more silence, no more injustice, and no more people like Heather running the show. Ava took a deep breath as the cafe's applause settled into murmurs. She had handled the situation with the level of professionalism and composure she had spent years mastering. But that didn't mean it hadn't affected her. Moments like this were never easy, no matter how many times she had faced discrimination in her life. But this time, the power was in her hands, and she had made sure the right message was sent. Brew and Bean would not be a place where racism thrived. She turned to Eric, the shift manager, who still looked stunned. "Let's step into the office," she said. "We need to discuss a few things." Eric swallowed and nodded. "Yes, of course. Right this way." As they made their way toward the back of the cafe, Ava could feel the eyes of the customers still on her. Some whispered in hushed voices, others nodded in approval. A few, particularly the men who had witnessed Heather's behavior, looked sheepish, as if ashamed for standing by in silence. It was a reaction she was all too familiar with. People always realized too late that they could have spoken up. Inside the small back office, Eric pulled out a chair for her before taking a seat across the desk. He still looked nervous, but there was something else there. Relief, maybe even respect. He had clearly been waiting for a leadership change, and Ava could sense it. "I just want to start by saying," Eric said, his voice measured, "what Heather did back there. That's not a reflection of everyone who works here. Some of us have spoken up before, but management, well, before you, never really did anything about it." Ava nodded. "I appreciate you saying that," she replied, "and I want to make it clear. I'm not here to punish anyone who is doing their job the right way, but I need full transparency. Has this been a pattern with Heather?" Eric exhaled, running a hand through his short brown hair. "Yes," he admitted. "She's always had this superiority thing going on. She treats some customers like royalty, while others, especially black customers, got attitude. But she was slick about it. She never outright refused service until today." Ava folded her arms. "Did you report it?" "Yes," Eric said quickly. "A few of us did, but it never went anywhere. Our last district manager brushed it off, and honestly, most of us figured we'd just have to deal with it." Ava's jaw tightened. She had expected as much. Racism in the workplace didn't thrive in isolation. It was upheld by negligence. The previous leadership had failed to act, and because of that, people like Heather had felt emboldened. "Well, that changes now," Ava said firmly. "Starting today, we're implementing a zero-tolerance policy on discrimination, whether it's subtle or overt. I'll be conducting an internal review of complaints from all locations. And we're bringing in mandatory inclusivity training for all employees, managers included." Eric let out a slow breath, nodding. Honestly, that's great to hear," he admitted. "This place needs it." Ava glanced at the framed corporate policies hanging on the wall, most of them outdated. "We're also restructuring management," she continued. "I need to make sure that people in leadership positions are actually upholding company values. From what I saw today, you stepped up when it mattered." Eric blinked, processing her words. "Wait, does that mean?" "I'd like you to take over as general manager of this location," Ava said smoothly. "If you're up for it." Eric looked momentarily speechless. Wow, yes. I mean, absolutely. I'd love that," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "Thank you." Ava nodded. "I'll set up a meeting with HR later this week. In the meantime, I want you to get a feel for how your team feels about these changes. If anyone has concerns, I want to hear about them." Eric smiled, still looking a little stunned but genuinely grateful. "You got it." With that, Ava stood, shaking his hand before exiting the office. She had only been in the cafe for less than an hour, and already the atmosphere felt different. Employees who had once walked on eggshells now stood a little taller. Customers who had witnessed the exchange now regarded her with newfound respect. As she stepped back toward the counter, a young woman with dark, curly hair approached her hesitantly. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said softly. Ava turned to her. "Yes, I just wanted to say," the young woman, who looked to be in her early 20s, took a deep breath. "I was in line when that happened, and I really admire how you handled it. I'm black too, and I've had people treat me like that before. But you stood up for yourself in a way I don't think I ever could." Ava's expression softened. "What's your name?" she asked. "Jasmine," the girl said shyly. "Well, Jasmine," Ava said warmly, "you can stand up for yourself. You have that power. Sometimes it's scary, but you don't have to let people like Heather define your worth." Jasmine nodded, a hint of determination in her eyes. "Thank you." Ava smiled before heading toward the exit. Just as she reached the door, one of the well-dressed men who had been in line behind her earlier caught up to her. He was the same man who had ordered a caramel latte right after she was refused service. "Miss Thompson," he said, clearing his throat. Ava turned to him with mild curiosity. "Yes." He shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. I just wanted to apologize." "For what?" Ava asked, already knowing the answer. The man sighed. "For standing there and not saying anything when Heather was treating you like that." I knew what she was doing was wrong, and I should have spoken up. Ava studied him for a moment before responding. Why didn't you? His shoulders slumped slightly. I guess I just didn't want to get involved. It was easier to ignore it. Ava nodded slowly. I appreciate your honesty, she said. But let me ask you something. What would you have done if I hadn't been the new CEO? If I had just been another customer with no power in this situation? The man exhaled sharply. I don't know, he admitted. I'd like to think I would have still said something. But maybe I wouldn't have. Ava gave him a small but knowing smile. Then that's something to think about, she said. Because silence helps people like Heather keep doing what they do. The man nodded solemnly. You're right. I won't make that mistake again. Ava gave him a final nod before pushing open the cafe door and stepping out into the crisp morning air. As she walked toward her car, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not just because she had taken action, but because she had sparked something. Change wasn't just about removing people like Heather from positions of power. It was about shifting mindsets, making people think twice about the role they played in allowing discrimination to go unchecked. And this was just the beginning. Ava nodded, exhaling slowly. We need to send out a company-wide memo tonight. Every single employee should know that if they have experienced or witnessed discrimination, they can come forward without fear of retaliation. I'll draft something up, Marcus said, jotting notes, but you should expect some pushback. Some of the managers from older stores aren't exactly thrilled about these changes. Ava gave a small, knowing smile. They don't have to be thrilled. They just have to follow the rules. Just as she finished her sentence, her office phone rang. She picked it up, recognizing the number immediately. It was from a Brew and Bean location in Los Angeles, one of their busiest stores. This is Ava Thompson, she answered. There was a slight hesitation before the voice on the other end spoke. Ms. Thompson, my name is Lena Carter. I'm a shift supervisor at our LA location, and I just wanted to say thank you. Ava sat up straighter. Thank you. Yes, Lena said, her voice full of emotion. I saw the news about what happened at the downtown store this morning. I wanted to tell you that there are a lot of us who have dealt with exactly that kind of thing from both customers and coworkers. And we never thought anyone in corporate would actually care. Ava softened. Lena, I do care. That's why I'm here. Lena let out a shaky breath. I believe you. And honestly, knowing that someone like you is in charge now, it gives me hope. Ava's chest tightened. Hope. That was what she was working for. Not just policy changes, not just corporate restructuring, but actual, tangible hope for people like Lena, employees who had spent years thinking that their experiences didn't matter. Thank you for calling me, Ava said sincerely. And if you ever need anything, if you see something that needs to change, don't hesitate to reach out. I will, Lena promised. And Ms. Thompson? Keep shaking things up. Ava chuckled. Oh, don't worry. I intend to. After she hung up, Marcus grinned. You're officially a CEO with a fan club. Ava laughed, shaking her head. Not a fan club, just people who finally feel seen. Marcus smirked. Same thing, but as much as Ava appreciated the support, she knew there was still a long road ahead. Change wasn't just about firing one bad employee or updating a few policies. It was about shifting an entire culture. She stood, grabbing her coat. Come on, Marcus. We have more work to do. Where are we going? He asked, following her toward the elevator. To visit more stores, Ava said simply. If we're going to fix this company, I need to see exactly what we're dealing with. And with that, she stepped into the elevator, ready to continue the fight. Because change wasn't just coming. It was already here. The next morning, Ava was already on the move. She had made a promise to herself. If Brew and Bean was going to change, she needed to see the reality of its stores firsthand. Not just the high-performing locations, not just the ones where she had connections, but all of them, especially those where reports of discrimination and misconduct had been swept under the rug. Her first stop of the day was a suburban branch in a wealthy neighborhood. On paper, it was one of the best-performing stores in the company. But as soon as she walked in, she sensed something off. The store was bright, modern, and filled with business professionals sipping their morning lattes. but the atmosphere felt sterile, almost unwelcoming. Ava noticed that all the baristas behind the counter looked the same. Young, white, and polished. Nothing inherently wrong with that, except that she had read the hiring reports for this location. There had been applications from people of color, bilingual speakers, and differently abled applicants, but the store had a strangely low percentage of diversity compared to other locations in the region. She stepped in line and waited, watching carefully. A young black woman stood ahead of her, patiently waiting to order. When she reached the counter, the barista barely made eye contact. "Hi, can I get a chai latte with oat milk, please?" the woman asked politely. The barista, a tall, blonde woman with a sharp, impatient look, sighed heavily. "We don't have oat milk." Ava's eyes flickered to the side of the counter, where 3 full cartons of oat milk sat. The customer hesitated. I can see it right there." The barista rolled her eyes. "It's not available. Do you want something else or not?" Ava felt her blood boil. Here we go again. The customer clenched her jaw, clearly aware of what was happening. But like so many others in her position, she chose not to escalate. "Fine, just a regular chai latte." The barista rang her up without another word. No thank you, no smile, not even the pretense of good customer service. When Ava stepped up next, the barista's entire demeanor changed. "Good morning. What can I get started for you today?" she asked, suddenly bright and perky. Ava smiled, but there was steel behind it. "Actually, I'd love an oat milk latte." The barista hesitated, clearly recognizing the trap she had just walked into. "Oh, sure, of course." Ava watched as she carefully prepared the drink, with the oat milk she had just claimed wasn't available. As soon as the transaction was done, Ava pulled out her business card and placed it on the counter. "Thank you," she said. "I'll be back shortly to meet with your manager." The barista frowned, confused. She glanced down at the card, and within seconds, her entire face drained of color. "Ava Thompson, CEO, Brew and Bean." The woman visibly gulped. Ava simply smiled. "See you soon." And with that, she turned and walked out, already making a note to return later. That location would be getting a full investigation. Her next stop was a small location near a college campus. It was one of the more diverse stores in the company, with a young, energetic staff and a steady flow of students rushing in between classes. Ava ordered a coffee and sat by the window, casually observing. The difference in service was immediate. A Latino barista greeted every customer with genuine enthusiasm, even remembering the names and usual orders of some regulars. A young woman in a wheelchair rolled up to the counter, and the staff instinctively lowered the card reader for her without her having to ask. The atmosphere was welcoming, inclusive, warm. When Ava approached the counter after her coffee, she introduced herself. "I just wanted to say, you all are doing an amazing job here," she said sincerely. The baristas exchanged surprised glances before breaking into grins. "Thank you," the shift leader, a young black woman named Maya, said. "Wait, you're Ava Thompson? Like, the new CEO?" "That's me," Ava confirmed with a chuckle. Maya's eyes widened with excitement. "Wow, okay, I gotta say, what you did at that downtown location. Legendary. The video's been everywhere." Ava shook her head with amusement. "Not exactly how I planned my first public appearance as CEO. But I'm glad people are paying attention." Maya leaned forward, lowering her voice slightly. "Can I be honest? A lot of us were scared when we heard there was new leadership. But when we saw what you stood for, changed everything. People actually feel like they can speak up now." Ava felt a deep sense of satisfaction at those words. This was what it was all about. Ava drove away from the cafe, but the events of the morning lingered in her mind. The confrontation with Heather had been necessary, and the changes she was implementing at Brew and Bean were long overdue. But what stayed with her the most was that man's admission. "I didn't want to get involved." How many people had seen discrimination, prejudice, or outright racism happen right in front of them but had chosen to look away? Too many, and that was part of the problem. She knew that real change wasn't just about punishing those who were openly biased. It was about holding everyone accountable, including those who stayed silent. As she pulled into the parking lot of Brew, and Bean's corporate headquarters, she mentally prepared herself for the next challenge. If there was complacency at the store level, then there was a strong chance it existed in upper management too. She needed to make sure the entire company was aligned with the vision she was bringing in. The office buzzed with activity as she walked in, employees murmuring as they noticed her arrival. Her assistant, Marcus, a sharp and efficient young man, met her at the entrance of her office. "Morning, Ms. Thompson," he greeted. "I've got your schedule for today, but there's already something pressing." HR received a call from the manager of the downtown location. Ava raised an eyebrow. "Which location?" "The one you visited this morning." She set down her bag. "Let me guess. Heather is trying to save herself." Marcus smirked. "Something like that. She's claiming wrongful termination." Ava sighed, but she wasn't surprised. People like Heather never saw themselves as the problem. "Set up a meeting with HR," she said. "I want to be in the room for this." Marcus nodded. "Will do. Also, you have a leadership meeting in an hour. Word is, some of the executives are nervous about the changes you're bringing." Ava let out a quiet chuckle. Of course they were. Corporate leaders were often comfortable with the status quo, especially when it allowed them to avoid conflict. But Ava wasn't here to maintain comfort. She was here to rebuild. An hour later, she sat at the head of the boardroom table, facing a group of executives, most of whom had been in their roles for years. Some looked open to discussion, while others, particularly an older man named Walter Green, the VP of Operations, looked skeptical. "I'm sure you've all heard about the incident at one of our locations this morning," Ava began. A few exchanged glances. Walter cleared his throat. "Yes, we have," he said. "And, if I may be candid, while we all agree that discrimination is unacceptable, we have protocols in place for handling these matters." Ava leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "And yet, those protocols weren't enough to prevent what happened. That tells me our system is broken." Walter's lips thinned, but he didn't argue. "Let me be clear," Ava continued. "I am not here to quietly maintain a system that allows discrimination to go unchecked. Brew and Bean is a company that serves the public, all of the public. If we don't make meaningful changes now, it will cost us not just in lawsuits but in reputation. And in this era, reputation is everything." One of the executives, a woman named Dana Fields, spoke up. "What changes are you proposing?" Ava leaned back, outlining her plan. "First, a company-wide zero-tolerance policy on discrimination with immediate termination for violations. Second, mandatory inclusivity training for every employee, from baristas to top executives. Third, an anonymous reporting system so employees and customers can flag issues without fear of retaliation." Walter exhaled sharply. "These are aggressive measures." "They are necessary measures," Ava corrected. "And let's be honest, if a customer hadn't recorded what happened today, would we have even heard about it? How many complaints have gone ignored before now?" Silence. That was all the answer she needed. After the meeting, Marcus pulled her aside. "That was bold," he said with a grin. Ava smirked. "You expected anything less?" He chuckled. "Not at all. Also, HR is ready for the meeting with Heather." Ava sighed. "All right, let's get this over with." Heather sat in the HR conference room, arms crossed, looking defensive. She barely glanced at Ava when she entered, but there was tension in the air. She's still hoping to intimidate her way out of this. Ava had seen it before. People who wielded casual racism as a weapon often assumed they could talk their way out of consequences. The HR director, Laura Whitman, sat across from Heather, professional but firm. "Heather, you filed a complaint claiming wrongful termination. Before we proceed, I want to remind you that we have video evidence of what happened this morning." Heather's jaw tightened. "I wasn't being racist," she snapped. "I was just having a bad morning, and I didn't recognize her as the CEO." Ava tilted her head. "And if I had been just another customer, would you have treated me any differently?" Heather didn't respond. "That's what I thought," Ava said. Heather's lips pressed into a thin line. "I've worked for this company for 3 years. I have bills, responsibilities. Firing me over one mistake is extreme." Ava met her gaze steadily. A mistake is getting an order wrong, she said. What you did was intentional discrimination. Heather shifted uncomfortably. I didn't mean. It doesn't matter what you meant, Ava interrupted. It matters what you did. And let's be honest, Heather. You didn't expect consequences because you've gotten away with it before. Heather's silence confirmed it. Laura adjusted her glasses. Heather, after reviewing the footage and complaints, your termination stands. Heather's face paled. You're ruining my life over a misunderstanding. Ava exhaled, shaking her head. No, Heather. You ruined your own life by choosing discrimination over decency. This company has no room for people like you. Heather stormed out without another word. As soon as the door closed behind her, Laura sighed. Well, that was dramatic. Marcus, who had been quietly observing, smirked. She really thought she could talk her way out of it. Ava leaned back. People like her always do. As she left the conference room, Ava knew that today was only the beginning. She had made a statement, not just to Heather, but to everyone watching. Brew and Bean was under new leadership, and under her leadership, things were going to change. The rest of the day was a whirlwind of meetings, decisions, and follow-ups. Ava knew that real change didn't happen overnight, but today had been an important first step. The message was clear. There would be no tolerance for discrimination at Brew and Bean. After wrapping up at corporate, she returned to her office, where Marcus was waiting with a stack of reports. You made waves today, he said with a grin, handing her a list of employee complaints from various Brew and Bean locations. HR finally started combing through past reports. And, well, let's just say Heather wasn't the only problem. Ava scanned the pages, her jaw tightening. Racial discrimination, unequal treatment of minority employees, customers being ignored based on their appearance. It was a pattern that had been allowed to fester under previous leadership. This is exactly what I was afraid of, she muttered. Marcus sat across from her. Yeah, but the difference now? You're actually doing something about it. Well, she said, if you ever need anything, resources, training, better support from corporate, you have my number. Maya grinned. Oh, you might regret that offer. I've got ideas. Ava laughed. I look forward to hearing them. As she left the store, she couldn't help but feel hopeful. Not every location was broken. Some already had the culture she envisioned, they just needed leadership that cared. That afternoon, she returned to the corporate office to find Marcus waiting with an update. You're going viral again, he announced with a smirk, handing her a tablet. Ava frowned. Oh God, what now? He pulled up a video on social media, footage from the suburban cafe. Someone had recorded her calling out the barista's lie, catching the exact moment she handed over her business card. The caption read, CEO catches racist barista in a lie. Watch her face when she realizes who she just messed with. Ava groaned, pinching the bridge of her nose. I swear I'm not doing this on purpose. Marcus laughed. Well, whether you mean to or not, people love seeing bad employees get what they deserve. The videos already hit 1 million views. Ava sighed, but she couldn't deny that if these moments were going to be publicized, at least they were sending a message. Marcus scrolled through the comments. And look, people are actually coming forward with their own experiences at Brew and Bean locations. There's a whole thread of customers talking about discrimination, poor service, and toxic workplace culture. Ava leaned in, reading the comments carefully. I was ignored at a Brew and Bean last month because of my accent. Glad she's taking action. But this is a bigger problem than just one store. Finally, someone in corporate is paying attention. Ava set down the tablet, her resolve hardening. This isn't just about Heather, she said. This is bigger than one employee or even one store. We have a company-wide culture issue. Marcus nodded. So what's the plan? Ava's expression turned determined. We start a full audit. I want every single store evaluated for racial bias, hiring discrimination, and employee misconduct. If we find issues, we fix them. If there are managers like Heather, they're gone. Marcus grinned. Now that's the kind of leadership this company needed. Ava exhaled, already thinking 10 steps ahead. The work ahead wouldn't be easy, But she had the power now, and she wasn't about to waste it, because this wasn't just about coffee. This was about justice. The next few days were a whirlwind of action. Ava wasted no time in launching the full-scale company audit she had promised. Every single brew and bean location, from small suburban branches to the busiest city hubs, would be evaluated for workplace culture, hiring practices, and customer experience. She wanted the truth. No sugarcoating, no half measures. To ensure honesty, she hired an independent consulting firm to handle the investigations, making it clear that she wanted raw, unfiltered feedback. Employees could submit anonymous complaints, and customers were encouraged to share their experiences. By the third day, hundreds of reports flooded in. Ava sat in her office, skimming through the most damning ones. Black employees are always scheduled for the worst shifts. A manager told me I wasn't the right fit because of my hijab. Customers treat minority baristas like trash, and management does nothing. I reported discrimination twice. Nothing changed. Ava felt her anger simmer. How had this been ignored for so long? She looked up as Marcus walked in, holding a fresh stack of reports. "You're gonna love this," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Turns out, more than a few district managers have been burying complaints for years. They didn't want bad press. Ava's jaw tightened. There it was. The rot wasn't just at the store level. It had been protected by leadership. She leaned back in her chair. "How many managers are we talking?" Marcus flipped through the files. "At least 12 that we know of." 12, Ava repeated, shaking her head. 12 people who had the power to fix this but chose to ignore it. Marcus nodded. "And they all work under Walter Green." Of course, Walter, the VP of Operations. The same man who had looked so uncomfortable during the leadership meeting, the one who had called her policies too aggressive. Ava exhaled sharply. "Call an emergency executive meeting. Now!" Within an hour, the top executives of Brew and Bean sat in the boardroom. Walter Green was among them, looking annoyed at the sudden summons. Ava stood at the head of the table, holding up a thick folder. "These," she began, voice steady, "are reports from our company-wide audit. Hundreds of them. Employees detailing years of discrimination, misconduct, and leadership failures." Murmurs filled the room. Some executives shifted uncomfortably. Walter crossed his arms. "Ava, if I may." "You may not." Ava cut him off sharper than intended. "Because I've read through these reports, Walter. And a dozen of your district managers are directly responsible for ignoring or covering up complaints." Walter's face reddened. "That's an exaggeration." Ava threw the stack of reports onto the table. "Read them yourself." Silence. One by one, the executives picked up pages, reading the testimonials from employees who had been mocked, ignored, or dismissed. Finally, Dana Fields, the only other executive who had openly supported Ava's policies, spoke up. "This is unacceptable," she said, her voice tinged with disgust. "We've been letting this happen under our watch." Walter huffed. "Look, these are isolated incidents. Every company has complaints." "No," Ava said coldly. "This isn't isolated. It's systemic. And do you know what happens to companies that ignore systemic discrimination?" Walter's jaw clenched, but he didn't respond. Ava leaned forward, eyes locked on him. "They get sued. They get boycotted. They fail." A heavy silence followed. Finally, Walter muttered, "What do you want to do?" Ava exhaled. This was it. "We fire the district managers who covered up complaints," she said. Immediately, Walter stiffened. "That's extreme." "No," Ava said. "It's accountability." Another murmur spread across the table. Dana spoke up again. "I agree with Ava. If we don't act now, we're sending a message that this behavior is acceptable." Walter scowled. "And what about me, Ava? You clearly think I'm the villain here." Ava didn't flinch. "You let this happen on your watch. You should resign." The room fell silent. Walter's eyes widened. "Excuse me?" Ava's voice remained calm but firm. "We're cleaning house. That includes you." Walter let out a bitter laugh. "You can't be serious." Ava folded her arms. If you don't resign, I'll make sure your name is included in the company's public statement. And I promise you, Walter, this story will break. Walter's nostrils flared. He looked at the faces around the table, executives who no longer backed him. Finally, with a defeated exhale, he muttered, "Fine." Ava nodded. Effective immediately, Walter shoved back his chair and stormed out of the boardroom. For the first time since she had taken over, the company felt like hers. After the meeting, Marcus met her outside the boardroom. "Holy sh*T, he whispered. "You just took down a VP." Ava shrugged. "He took himself down." Marcus smirked. "You know this is gonna make headlines, right?" Ava exhaled. "Good, because this wasn't just about Brew and Bean anymore. This was about setting an example for every other company that let discrimination fester. And she wasn't done yet. The following morning, Ava woke up to exactly what she had expected: headlines. Her phone buzzed non-stop with notifications. News articles, social media discussions, emails from executives, and messages from employees flooded her inbox. Brew and Bean's leadership shakeup had gone public. She scrolled through the headlines. CEO of Brew and Bean fires top execs after company-wide audit on discrimination. New CEO Ava Thompson cleans house after viral racism scandal. Zero-tolerance policy in full effect. Ava Thompson means business. Ava set down her phone and took a deep breath. This was exactly what she had planned, but she knew the real work was just beginning. As she walked into the office, Marcus greeted her with his usual smirk. "You've officially gone corporate viral." Ava chuckled. Yeah, I saw." He handed her a printed copy of a particularly popular op-ed. "This one caught my attention." Ava glanced at the bold title. "Ava Thompson's leadership is the wake-up call corporate America needs." She skimmed through the article, her heart tightening at certain lines. For too long, CEOs have turned a blind eye to discrimination in the workplace. Ava Thompson is proving that real leadership isn't about preserving power. It's about making change. By firing executives who ignored discrimination complaints, she's sending a message. If you protect racism, you don't belong in leadership. Ava set the paper down, inhaling slowly. Marcus leaned against her desk. "So, how does it feel to be the face of corporate accountability?" Ava smirked. "Like I need a bigger cup of coffee." But before she could even take a breath, her phone rang. The number was blocked. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Anonymous call?" Ava debated whether to answer, then decided why not. She pressed the green button. "This is Ava." A moment of silence. Then, "Ms. Thompson, my name is Cynthia Harrington. I'm a legal representative for a group of former Brew and Bean employees." Ava sat up straighter. "Former employees?" "Yes," Cynthia said. "They were wrongfully terminated, forced out, or harassed in ways that directly violated employment law. And they're ready to speak out." Ava's pulse quickened. This wasn't just an internal issue anymore. "Ms. Harrington," Ava said carefully, "are you telling me there's grounds for a class action lawsuit?" Cynthia's voice was calm. "Yes, but here's the thing. We'd rather work with you than against you." Ava exhaled, her mind racing. A lawsuit could cripple Brew and Bean. Even if they won in court, the damage to the brand would be massive. But if she handled this right, she could turn a scandal into a turning point. "I want to meet with them," Ava said firmly. Cynthia hesitated. "You do?" "Yes," Ava said. "And not in a boardroom. Face to face." 2 days later, Ava met with the former employees in a neutral space, a small community center outside of corporate HQ. She walked in alone. No lawyers, no PR reps, no corporate shields. Just her. The room was filled with about a dozen people, all of whom had suffered some form of workplace discrimination at Brew and Bean. Ava recognized one of them immediately, Lena, the shift supervisor who had called her after the viral cafe incident. Lena's eyes widened when she saw Ava. "You actually came," she said. Ava nodded. "Of course I did." She took a seat at the front of the room. "I'm not here to defend the past," she said. "I'm here to fix the future. So let's talk." For the next 2 hours, they did. Stories of racial bias, gender discrimination, pay disparities, and workplace bullying came pouring out. Ava listened. She took notes. She apologized. And then she made them a promise. "Here's what we're going to do," she said. "We'll settle this out of court. Every employee who was wronged will be compensated fairly. And if you're willing, we'll offer rehiring options for those who still want to work here under the new leadership." Murmurs of surprise spread through the room. Cynthia studied her carefully. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," Ava said. Lena crossed her arms. "And how do we know this isn't just PR?" Ava met her gaze. "Because I'm putting you in charge of our new Employee Justice Board. I want former employees like you, people who've lived through this firsthand, to help us enforce real accountability." Lena's eyes widened. "You want me to?" "Yes," Ava said. "Help me rebuild this company from the inside out." A beat of silence. Then Lena nodded. "I'm in." 1 month later, the headlines had changed. Brew and Bean becomes industry leader in workplace reform. CEO Ava Thompson implements unprecedented employee justice program. Former employees return to Brew and Bean. This time with power. Ava stood in her office, staring out at the city skyline. She had done what most CEOs were too afraid to do. She had admitted the company's failures. She had fired the bad actors. She had listened. And most importantly, she had given power back to the employees. Marcus walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "So," he said, handing her one. "What's next?" Ava smiled. "We keep going, because this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning."